I'm going to give you a little bit of SANPARKS view, but I'm going to challenge your brains. I think we need to get out of the box that we are stuck in. And you know, we've had a couple of presentations this week. Outside this session was about rhinos. Why the hell should that matter? Yes, there are these nice green stuff, the ecosystem engineers, and yes, people has published it. I think Joris gave a nice talk about some of that. We also know the enabling engineers. They generate funding for us. People like to come and watch them. But there are key challenges associated with rhinos, but probably more associated with social things. The rhino business at the moment benefits only a few and alienate many people. We need to change it. We need to think about how we can do it. And yes, we've got lots of uncertainties. Everybody makes a proposal and all these sort of things, and you've got lots of papers coming out criticizing each other and so forth. Richard gave us a very nice backup of what is busy happening with rhinos and numbers per se. This is the white rhinos on Kruger. And the most significant thing that then Natal Parks Board did in the 1960s for rhinos was putting 351 white rhinos in Kruger. That became 1,000 by 1990, 2,000 by the year 2000, and 10,000 by the year 2010. At the moment, the whole of northern Kruger are about empty of rhinos. There are places for rhinos to go. But a very important point you have to remember, you see that little blip there in the end, since about 2008, 2009, things started going the other way. And yes, us scientists can't tell whether things are actually busy declining, but certainly there are some suggestions that we may be in trouble. This is a bit of a reality check for Kruger. 691 rhino poachers that we are aware of that's around Kruger now. 240 guns that are sitting in there. Where's this pointer? Ah, here we go. And yes, this is the outcome. Yes, you've seen that particular rapid increase in poaching. This is the thing that frightens us all. We had 2 talks that are busy showing us that. That is the actual rhino rating poached per day in Kruger. That little graph at the bottom is the carcasses that's sitting out there. Yes, we've slowed down the carcasses, but it is still gradually increasing. We're going to go to just over two rhinos killed a day. That red one is very important. That's the number of poaching activities that we are getting per day. So in spite of this incredible onslaught coming from this crowd around Kruger, Rangers has managed to actually get some control over that particular poaching rate. I've just listed you here. These are the poaching gangs. If that name is completely red, it's entirely a Mozambican gang. If it's completely green, it's entirely a South African gang. And if it's mixed, it's a combination. Very importantly, the Mozambican gangs are not living in Mozambique. They are also living on this side. They've infiltrated communities. They are absolutely intimidating people. You know, we have got general disruption of law and order in some of these places associated with these things. That's the reality. So what is the change? I've had several emails come to me and say, we know how to solve poaching. We've done it before. We can do it again. Well, it's bullshit. We have to do something different. And the reason is for that. We've got a complete change in context. Conrad published 6 particular things that is creating this incredible perfect storm. It boils down to 3 points. There are global economic processes that are currently taking place with local effects. 30% of the world's economic activity involves international trade. You know, whether it's legal or illegal, doesn't matter. This breakdown or these high profit potentials, and particularly the unclear property rights, is exactly what transnational organized crime is exploit. For the first time, we have an absolute broad-scale involvement of transnational organized crime in wildlife crimes. I think Steve's talk yesterday morning highlighted that a bit. Okay, and yes, lots of it comes from this conservation legacy of only a few elite benefiting from values that are associated with conservation and so forth. That's a change in context. No wonder we had to think a little bit differently. In this particular slide, where is this thing now? These 2 things are compulsory interventions. Cedric has just given you a nice summary of the sort of stuff that we have to do, our have-tos. The biological manners that Richard talked about, our have-tos. We've been doing it all the time. We are particularly good at it, and for that reason, we have got 20,000 rhinos in South Africa. But we cannot keep on doing that. We need to start thinking with the two different things. And there are 2 other pillars. By the way, this is the Minister of Environment Affairs broad framework on how she sees the rhinos. This is the elephant in the room, and maybe we should call this a rhino in a china shop. And then these other aspects, what I call the game-changing interventions. And I'm going to focus a little bit, I'm going to give you a very brief background on these things in the context of SANPARKS, but I really want to get to these two things at the bottom here. Right, the compulsory interventions. There's Kruger. Kruger is large, and rhinos don't occur at all dense equally across Kruger National Park. So in the south of Kruger, we've created this intensive protection zone, making use of a lot of technology to enable us to do a range of other things. We've created this joint protection zone. That is where we make largely use of human intelligence. And then in the north of the park, where rhinos are living in little hotspots, it makes no sense to think you can have the same strategy in that place compared to one in the south. There we've employed things like rhino husbandry techniques, very commonly used in other parts of Africa in small places. You put a ranger and he's like looking at that spot of rhinos. Obviously, I've also received a number of emails saying to us we should only have a few intensive protection zones and don't bother about the rest. And that is because there's an incredible belief that technology can do things for you. This here is a bit of an assessment that Marcus Hoffman and myself. So anything below that line means you've got largely more risks than benefits for that technology in helping you. Anything above the line means you've got more benefits than risks. And there's lots of technologies. I'm sure Cedric also gets lots of emails about people that want to solve, and they found the silver bullet. They largely group into 5 groups. Anything you do to a rhino, most of the time has got more risks than benefits for yourself. Anything that you are doing with these detector technologies, shot detectors and all these other sort of things, are very variable. And it's because most of the time they're largely in research and development phases, and when they pass that, they forget about the scale of the place. I asked the guy, so can you do this over Kruger? He said, well, yes, we can. I said, well, can you do it over the size of Israel? And he backs off. That's the size of Kruger. You know, and eventually when you get to this sort of end, this human stuff, you can't have a dog unless you've also got somebody with the dog. So we tend to get much more benefits when you do that. And when you get to this intelligence-based stuff, just like Cedric has identified, you get really powerful. Right, let's move to our second pillar. Richard has talked a lot about, and you know, some of you might have read the newspapers that says Kruger to evacuate rhinos. Well, that's also absolute bullshit. You know, we're actually doing what we have been doing for a very long time. The reason why we've got rhinos. Now, in Kruger's case, in 12 of the 35 landscapes, we've got populations that have actually stabilized, those rhinos sitting in that number. Adrian has described a couple of days ago very clearly some of the mechanisms, how that happens. We're also noticing reductions in birth rates and survival rates associated with density and environmental variables. Now it makes sense. If I want to stimulate growth, I go and remove rhinos where they're busy experiencing density dependence. So that's largely in the south of Kruger. And if I want to protect them from risks, I don't remove them from those areas where they've got high poaching risks. Those rhinos generate some excess rhinos. We call it strongholds, but this is how the Black Rhino expansion program and all the other things are working. If we expand our mind a bit, we can get a whole bunch of other places that we can put rhinos. Okay? And particularly with 2 definitions. You're better off trying to protect them there, but secondly, you do biological management that maximize growth. And eventually, depending on what kind of stronghold you have, you can have opportunities to generate revenue and fund a variety of rhino options. So it's very clear that without these 2 traditional interventions that we have done, rhinos would have been significantly declining by now. But we want to do much better than that. We can't just say we're keeping the rhinos there and we're happy with this. In comes this rhino into a china shop. This discussion about trade or no trade. Now let me unpack this a little bit for you. If you want to protect rhinos, we typically protect the asset, reduce demand. We heard Steve yesterday morning, or provide supply. We had the movie a couple of nights ago. Primarily, those 2 top activities are funded by what donors are prepared to give. And people are prepared to give money, largely in the global north of the world, because they don't want to see something go extinct. That's called extinction anxiety trade. When will you receive the most amount of money? When that species is just about extinct. So you're betting on extinction. And that betting on extinction is supporting two major activities that we're dealing with. Let's now talk about our other fellows, us. We've got this tons of rhino horns sitting in our stores in Skukuza. You know, we benefit from these rhino management stuff. We go and sell live rhino things and some other products. At the moment, only the criminal syndicates are busy benefiting from one particular product. But when will we make the most amount of money? In fact, Bolter and Mason and their crowd actually predicted you make the most amount of money as soon as that species has gone extinct. So you're banking on extinction. The two dichotomous economic arguments that we are making are at the moment both predicting that we should rush rhinos to extinction. Is this true? Well, Tim Haas and myself made use of some information that we had from some private reserves and from Kruger's rhinos. So this red is Kruger's rhinos, those green are the private reserves or the provincial reserves, they're roughly each 5,000. And we actually used information about what poachers are being paid along the supply chain and how that changed over time and how the Asian population changed over time, together with the rhino population changes over time, and fitted the model to say, can we predict what happened from roughly 1998 to now, the rhinos with this interaction model. We argue if we can do that, surely we can also fiddle around with scenarios in future. And this is what happens. If we go do protection, a little bit more increased protection, we're probably getting at the maximum that we can do. Okay? Somewhere along the line, rhinos is going to go to extinction. In fact, anything I do suggests somewhere in the next 50 years, these things is not going to be around. So who the hell is going to save them? If the two opposing strategies, the two dichotomous discussions that we've been listening to for the last 2 days, is actually leading to this. In fact, when he introduced an aggressive disruption of organized crime, a really large-scale international level of disruption of organized crime, which include creating environments next to parks which is not conducive to these organized crime syndicates, exploiting them. Hell, all of a sudden I get sustainability. So, why the hell are we keep on talking about trade and no trade, when in fact there are stuff that we can do right now that can make very big differences? Let me give you the fourth pillar. The fourth pillar is this game-changing interventions. Now, classically, a supply chain looks like this. There's lots of people that produce it, there's lots of people that consume it, but there's only a couple of ways you can get it from the producer to the consumer. There are lots of poachers. All our current activities are sitting catching those guys. There are lots of consumers. All our current demand activities is trying to change these guys' behaviors. Why aren't we doing anything here? This is a place where we should be thinking about disrupting stuff if you want to disrupt stuff. And, as I said to you, collapsing those crime networks are critical, but you have to complement it. Let's just unpack this a little bit. I'm still good for time, man. Cedric has shown you very, very interesting the importance of intelligence and how it informs us, particularly at that first two levels, the operational intelligence and the tactical intelligence, and this is more or less where our stuff stops. You know, we don't go and do this strategic intelligence analysis. Start making the links about who's talking to who. Cedric and them has started to do some of those, I think, and I know the Kruger guys has also started to do. And there's two ways you can do it. Follow the horn. That's a classical Kruger network that's sitting around some of those poachers. By the way, this is about a year and a half ago, that particular network. What that does, it tells you who's the important person to really target, but even more importantly, what is the sequence in which you should be arresting this particular person to really disrupt this network. Else you're just removing the one guy and he's quickly replaced. So that's a one part. If we follow the money, we can do the similar sort of things. Now what this also allows us to do, and we've heard this request about troubles with convictions. You know, we are typically try to put a criminal case together, and a criminal case burden of proof is very high. If you do a civil case, it's the other way around. I've got a low burden of proof, and effectively the guy that I'm making the civil case against, he has to prove that I'm wrong. I give him the law and whatever problems, and Andy must please jump and shout if I'm wrong here, but that's how I understand it. Okay, there's a harsh reality which we're missing. Given that these crime syndicates are really good at exploiting people that are living next to our parks, why? It's because this is the harsh reality for people living out there. They don't have really good access to basic services, and when they do have that infrastructure is basically not good. What does this mean for this crime stuff? Now, I think all the traditional papers on the crime or the economies of crime highlight a very important relationship. The higher the experience or the inequality in a particular community, the higher the crime rate. There are lots of examples of those here. Kelly summarized that a little bit out there. Brian Childs, in his paper in 2012 in the African Journal of Science, then made this link and say, well, there's also an interaction between the kind of values that are sitting out there and what the diversity of values. And you tend to get sustainable use approaches, so sustainability of the systems, when you've got strong ownership, but there's also lots of values and there's high values that are sitting out there in those two things. I've listened this week, I deliberately this week went to all the social talks, social kind of talks. This is not the ones at the bar, I'm talking ones in the proper one. What is interesting, we have a lot of presentations that talked about benefit sharing. Our benefit sharing at the moment is an extreme elitist activity. Okay? We decide what benefits should be shared, and then even once we've decided, we decide when and how. So it's sort of a pseudo ownership that we create, and it's with very good intentions, and it's maybe the step that we have to take first. Whereas when you start thinking about reciprocal ownerships, somebody has got joint responsibility to manage those particular things. You know, you actually earn the right to share benefit now. It's an entirely different ownership sort of feeling that's sitting out there. This gives us some guidance. And I want to just now ask and say, well, what is this current RHINO war doing us? If this is the important structure that Maslow defined about what humans want and what humans need out of the environment, right at the bottom are basic needs, and eventually it's us fellows that sit under a tree to drink a sundown on a nice, beautiful day. Okay. The importance of that particular value depends on your kind of income. If you're right at the bottom here, you tend to be much more important around these particular values than what the guys at the top. Okay. Currently, if you think about protected areas, this little triangle is reversed. Most of the benefits that we are throwing or the people getting associated with those high sort of values. Where do you think the RHINO war is busy adding values? Right there. We are extraordinary, elitist, alienating people that are sitting right next to our parks. Imagine we can shift our mindset and say we develop a rural safety and security plan for people and rhinos. I'm not going to have a RHINO war room in Skukuza. I'm going to have a RHINO war room or a security and safety room in Bosbak Ridge that is now targeting these particular drivers that we've talked about. Imagine we can keep our benefit sharing ideas, and I have a RHINO-funded yo-yo tank program providing people basic needs for water that comes off their roof. I'm taking 4 hours of the daily walk to go fetch water around Kruger anyway, out of it. And yes, imagine we can create these particular economies, and yes, one of those may be a RHINO-associated economy. And this, I think, is the kind of stuff that are entirely in our grip as we speak right now. And yes, we have to take these steps from the zero ownership stuff to eventually evolving into this reciprocal ownership stuff. In my mind, making a really big change is to integrate our current safety and security stuff with our disruptive criminal network ideas, and yes, start building these reciprocal partnerships. I want to conclude, Mr. Chairman. Calming this perfect storm. Maybe it's time that we actually focus on the efforts that's in our control, not in other people's control. Those two there, it's been always in our control, we're good at it. This one, this is the RHINO in the China shop, is largely out of our control. It's entirely dependent on the international whim. This here is a new intervention. This game-changing stuff is a new intervention that's in our control. And if we had an initiative FAKISA that shifted from no marine protected areas to within 6 weeks having a plan for marine protected areas, why can't we have an initiative Slanganisa? I don't know if my Zulu is right. Or an initiative Slakaza to actually do and give some weight to these game-changing things. Mr. Chairman, It is time that we focus on the stuff that we can do. It's time that we stop being distracted by the stuff that we can't do. It is time that we unite. It is time that we save South Africans, and maybe we can save this guy. Thank you.